Boom. Okay, so as you know, it's a very exciting day for both of us. So for your audience, my name is Rajan Nazran from the Global Indian Series, the platform for people of Indian origin. And my second guest and my host and my co-host is...
Yes, my name is Dr. Kirk Megu. I'm the host of Independent Thought and Freedom on my channel, also with the Story Club, Global Politics and Global Cultures. And yeah, so this is a great sort of co-branded episode I'm doing with Rajan. And we may work together more closely in future, we hope. This might be the first of several collaborations. As you all know, been working with a story club during our break, and this may sort of expand the network.
Sounds good. Look, do you know what's exciting about this for me, Kirk, is together we make up the 50 Shades of Brown, almost the United Nations of Indianness. We're coming from Trinidad and Tobago down to the UK, all because of COVID as well. I think that is a blessing in disguise in itself.
Yeah, well, I mean, it's interesting for me operating from a small country in the Caribbean. So we have limited economies of scale, and then also I have to add, in terms of my sort of political stances and whatnot, I've had to also look wider than this small country for economic clients, business, etc. And so Zoom has always been part of, well, for a long time has been part of my business model. That's how I've connected with the world. And it's like COVID now is making the world catch up to it, because it was sometimes hard to get people to come on a Zoom platform, to, for whatever, it's so easy to do, but for whatever reason, they had a resistance to do it. Now people do it so easily, and it's quite amazing. And this is one of the many ways, in fact, for instance, okay, so we're talking about this in the global economy. Another thing is even about imperialism or the deindustrialization, or, so a lot of the problems people have with globalism and with the modern economy. We have experienced and analyzed these things in the West Indies and elsewhere, I suppose, in the developing world, in a way that, we have been ahead in some ways like that. For instance, one argument I always like to talk about in terms of global history and the emergence of modernity is that the Caribbean was the first part of the modern world when Columbus came here. And in fact, we were part of modernity much before most of Europe, for example. We were involved in a global system of trade, of import and export. Everything we produced was for export. Everything we consumed was imported. Even the labor was imported. That's why African slaves were brought here. That's why Indian indentures were brought here. Cheap labor for global investors coming in and creating global markets for sugar, creating the first industrial type economic organization. Before industrialization happened in Europe, you had these huge plantations with complex division of labor, with international production chains. It started here, but we experienced the underside of modernity in a way that other people in Europe, elsewhere, may not have. And so, we produced a whole series of thinkers and analysts that were critical of modernity for centuries now. And we have this whole discourse that the rest of the world is now sort of understanding in its own way. And I think there's and I've spent so much of my career trying to bring these two discourses together. And in so many ways, like this most recent wave of nationalism in the world, it fits into our own nationalist decolonization movement of the 50s and 60s. So, and there's a lot of ways that that we can enhance each other's discourses for liberation, emancipation for
Because you
development.
cast yourself as a third world nationalist, don't you?
Yeah, definitely. You know, even though, and who knows? I mean, if we analyze it further, but I was actually not even born in Trinidad. I was born in the States. I was raised in Canada, but at age of 21, I decided I'm not living there anymore. I can't, and I moved back to Trinidad, and I've been here since 1990, right after an attempted coup here, and I was working with unemployed out of school youth and some development projects, and I've just been doing stuff like that
I think what's fascinating for me is the way in which you found yourself going back to Trinidad and Tobago, because for most, we look at saying, okay, the country that we're in, if it is an emerging market, we want to go over to the markets are the beacon of hope of the world, you know, whether it comes to intellectualism or if it's business.
Yeah.
But your journey was slightly different because you found yourself in the US, in Canada, then thinking almost reverse. Run me through, what was that? What happened with you?
Right. So, I mean, and just to let you know, I mean, everybody, you know, all my family, my parents and everybody, you know, they thought I was crazy because they're still up there. Right. But I said, no, I cannot stay here. I don't want to. The trigger, because there's a lot of things, and I won't go into the whole thing, but the trigger was discovering Malcolm X. And I was into a lot of radical political, you know, movements and activism in the 80s, in the 1980s. And I was actually part of a program at the University of Toronto called International Development Studies, where we were looking at the development of the third world, and you know, and we're supposed to spend a year in a developing country working with an NGO and so forth. So there are a lot of these kind of white hippies in the department. It was a small department, and you know, this is a very interesting thing that later on, like when I got into Malcolm X, it you know, these things became sharper in focus for me. Although I noticed it, but didn't question it so much. The campus I was at, which is the Scarborough campus of the University of Toronto, had so many Asians, Africans, West Indians, right? I guess Chinese people as well. I don't remember a huge contingent at Scarborough campus at the time, although in Scarborough there was a huge contingent. But, and none of them, you know, who come from the third world were in this program about third world development, right? Yeah. They were in business courses, they were, you know, and that kind of stuff. And so here I was, son of immigrants, right? Struggling, you know, and everybody, you know, I've had different views of this, self-analyzing my life throughout time, and I think at one point I put too much emphasis on race. That's for sure.
Yeah.
Because everybody goes through teenage, you know, anxiety, angst. You don't know where you fit in and all this kind of stuff. So that's a universal thing. But it is compounded when you're an immigrant in another country.
Of course it is.
And especially at the time I was at, where we were real minorities. Now when you go to Toronto or London or whatever, it's white people are a minority, which is another thing. But really, when I was, it was very, very different, right? So there were, but yeah, so I kind of, I suppose at one point, you know, resolved, not explicitly, but I think implicitly in my mind that, you know, I was going to integrate fully, right? I mean, I was kind of, but I was always kind of half and half, in and out. And so, you know, I was, you know, I thought of myself as just, you know, a Canadian. I was like a Canadian, like everybody else is a Canadian, you know, but, and when I started to read Malcolm X, and I suppose I adopted this kind of hippie save the world attitude as a kind of, as my ideology, and which, you know, I think that the other immigrants have, they don't like that kind of hippie save the world thing, you know, that you know, these people, these poor people from the third world, that's your pet project. Today you're a vegetarian, tomorrow you're, saving the world, then you're going to be vegan, or then you're going to be into animal rights, or whatever. And it's that you take a pet project here and you go, there, that's that kind of attitude, this kind of save the world liberal attitude. And I think I was informed by it, I was inspired by it, I guess. Amnesty International, Band-Aid, these sorts of things that were coming up in the 1980s. And but then when Malcolm X, when I started to read Malcolm X, and I chose him just because he was so radical and taboo, and I was like getting into more extreme stuff, anarchism, Marxism, communism, and syndicalism, and all sorts of stuff like that. And I said, oh wow, this guy looks really radical, and he's getting people scared. This was before Malcolm X got into the mainstream. It was really when people didn't really know much about him, and that picture with him with the gun, by the window, that would like take everybody back. And I said, wow, I have to read this guy. And then, but when I did, it changed everything, because I understood how deformed my consciousness was, how I embraced this sort of Canadian identity without knowing anything about my past and my people. And I didn't want to know, and I would suppress it. There'd be some times when, if we were in a crowd of people and there was another Indian person there, I would purposely not speak to that Indian. Purposely, because I didn't want to seem like I was like clannish, or that I wasn't fitting. I wasn't just like everybody else, right? So I would just, I remember cutting off a friend of mine. He was a Goan. When we went to high school, it was a weird situation, because we went to high school far away. Only 4 people from my elementary school went to the same high school, and 3 of us were actually Indian. 2 were Goan, then was me, and then another was an Irish guy. And we were kind of friends, we were friendly. And then the Irish guy split off with the kind of elite, kind of preppy white kind of cliques there at the school. I kind of didn't know where I was fitting in. There was Filipinos, there was Italians, and and I didn't know where I would fit in. And then, like, when I was trying to figure out a group of friends to hang around with or whatever, one of my Goan friends, I remember, his hair, he wasn't stylish. His hair was kind of oily. And I was like, I said, I don't want to be so I like disassociated myself. I like pretended I didn't know who he was. I feel bad about that now. You know what I mean? But these are kind of things that happen when you're growing up. But there was a time for me to integrate. I rejected my past, right? And for me to be accepted by, because eventually I did like get into the most popular clique and all this kind of stuff at school. So when I started to read Malcolm X, and I just started to reflect on all this stuff, and I really got so angry, and I really got so angry at sort of how, in this zeal to integrate, what it did to me and my relationships to myself, to other people, and it really was a profound change. And all of a sudden, and so it wasn't, wow, these other people are oppressed and I'm going to save them, right? All of a sudden it's, wait, no, I am actually part of this, and my people and my heritage, and I have to also liberate myself. And so it's not, so it was this thing about the privileged person saving the poor, unfortunate soul. And so that was a huge thing for me. At the university program, I was going to, my plan was to go to El Salvador. I wanted to go in El Salvador, and I really wanted to hook up with the FMLN, right?
Yeah.
Then I said, no, I just was totally.
Now, how much of this is down to a quest for identity? That is saying, well, who am I? What am I? And how much of it is just down to youth?
Yeah. Well, it's both, right? Because part of youth is establishing and finding your identity.
Yeah.
That's, I think, a universal thing. And the thing about identity is that I never thought of it before, right? I never thought of it. And it's only when I started to read Malcolm X, that's when I thought of it. Because that's the questions he asked, like, who are you? Why are you a Christian? Right? I was raised a Catholic, and this school I'm talking about was a Catholic school. That's why there were all these goings, right?
Yeah.
Because they're Catholic. Um, and and so I never ever really thought of these questions, and what does being Christian mean for you, coming from a non-Christian background, right? So when they talk about heathens and idol worshippers, and so how do you view yourself when God is white? So how does that make you view your own holiness, right? And these are things that Malcolm X really put forth, and it's like these were shocking things for me. I never heard anybody say these things before, and it just knocked me down. And then I just resented everything about being, right? Like, nothing I learned in school was about me and my history, and we learned, and it's fine, I get, when I look back now, I mean, why should Canadians and Ukrainians and Irish people learn about the details of Trinidad history? They don't really need to, but I do, right? Because that is my history, right? But so I was in this context where I was learning everything except about me and where I fit in the world and who I was, and so and I just resented being up there. I was criticizing everything all the time. But you see, unlike the African American experience, the Black experience, and I think this is very much relevant to Black Lives Matter today, and all the so-called the appropriation of the civil rights language by the gay and lesbian and LGBTQ movement and all other people. And I think it's inappropriate and wrong, because I don't even think immigrants should appropriate the African American civil rights struggle language, because we have a different experience. Because this is what I was thinking for myself. I was thinking, okay, right? So Malcolm X kept talking about how we didn't land on Plymouth Rock like the Pilgrims. Plymouth Rock landed on us. They were brought there forcibly as slaves, and my family weren't brought to Canada forcibly, right? So why would I be complaining all the time as if I had no choice? I did have a choice, so I left. I'm basically that's what it was. Why would I stay up there, complain all the time, make my life miserable, make my head miserable, everything? I was just, saying, oh, that's so white. Oh, that's so white. Oh, but I'm in Canada. Nobody forced my family to be up there, right?
Yeah.
So I said.
But then, I get it. Well, what are your thoughts on, because we spoke about this, what are your thoughts on Black Lives Matter now? Where it's heading to?
Well, I think Black Lives, right. So I was convinced and still am, a huge admirer of Malcolm X and Black nationalism. In fact, I'm doing a series, and I would let you guys know, I'm also a host of the podcast on New Books Network, the New Books Network, which is the largest book podcast in the world. It's published out of Massachusetts. We get 1.5 million downloads per month. And I'm doing a special series. I do the politics and polemics books there, the interviews with authors. But I'm doing 2 series for them right now. One is on Malcolm X and Black nationalism, and the other is on Third World nationalism. And the reason why I started it was when I was talking to the editor, Marshall Poe, one day, and somebody was criticizing me for speaking to Alexander Dugin, the famous Russian philosopher who I greatly admire, and I really think he's an amazing person. And he's demonized by the West. He's demonized as a fascist, as I don't know what, a Putin's brain, and so forth, right? Anyway, so someone was saying, they were complaining to them, why am I giving this fascist a platform and so forth? And you know, so Marshall was kind of speaking to me about this, and and I said, listen, just tell him I'm a third world nationalist. You know, what's he talking about? Because, you know, people have called me like a white supremacist, which is ridiculous, because I'm sympathetic to some white nationalism, right? But because of my own nationalism. Marshall first kind of chuckled and laughed. He thought I was making a joke. And then I realized he didn't know. I said, you don't know what third world nationalism is? And he said, no, not really. I never heard of that before. I said, wow. And then I started to explain it to him, and the whole history of it, the spirit of Bandung, and which Malcolm X talked about all the time, and the non-aligned movement, and the new international economic order, and all this sort of stuff. And he said, you know, people in the States, we don't know about this stuff, and we need to know about it, and you'd be the best person to do it. So I'm doing that series right now, some amazing interviews I've been doing, so I'm a nationalist. Black Lives Matter is not a nationalist movement. I side with Malcolm X in his critique of Martin Luther King. You know, why would you want to sit in somebody else's restaurant to eat their sandwiches when they don't want you there? And especially if they're going to prepare the food you're going to eat and you can't see them in the kitchen, you're going to eat that sandwich. I mean, why don't you own your own restaurant, right? Why are you complaining to somebody else to get a job for you? Why don't you own a business to give your people jobs, right? This is the Garveyite roots, with which Malcolm X's parents were Garveyites, and then Nation of Islam is a very much Garveyite organization. So I am totally at one with that thinking, ideology, and so forth. Black Lives Matter is not about that, right? Black Lives Matter is not about self-determination for Black people, for the understanding, as the Nation of Islam had an understanding, that Black people are a distinct people in the Americas, and in America, in the United States of America, and deserve a homeland. That's, you know, up to Farrakhan today, that's the demand, that Black people need a homeland in America, right? And they want to run their own country. And I support that. It may not be realistic or whatever, or maybe a project in the future, but fundamentally, I think it is correct. It is a correct position. But so Black Lives Matter is not about that. Black Lives Matter is like the NAACP in so many ways. The NAACP was not a Black organization. Blacks are the face of the organization. It was, you know, it was very much tied. I don't know if it's explicitly tied to the ADL, but definitely it was part of. But it was funded by white Ashkenazi Jewish people. Who were the leadership right through the civil rights movement. It's only recently that Black people have actually headed the NAACP, right? And that it's been an integrationist movement that's been led and directed by others. So first of all, you know, what are the goals of Black Lives Matter? Okay, police brutality and so forth. Okay, we can discuss that. Nobody supports police brutality, right? I don't. There's.
No, I think my frustration with it is, look, I've been very fortunate because I travel. So it's been 58 countries that you go to, and after that you start seeing the parallels. You start seeing the baseline of human behavior, and I suppose the fact that I find difficult to swallow is that we're commercializing on the very fabric of people's biggest fears, which is identity. Yeah. And that's what it is. You believe in Black Lives Matter? Yeah, of course, buy the t-shirt. I can't afford the t-shirt. Well, you don't really believe in it. You believe in it, buy the cap. Well, why? The cap's made in China. It doesn't matter. You're part of it. So now all of a sudden we're taking this herd behavior of bringing people together with the lowest common denominator of fear. And we're saying, but Black Lives Matter. Whose? If you're going to Africa, if I can take you to places in Sierra Leone You see what took place there. Are we seeing the US's version of that making a difference, especially that of Black Lives Matter? No. If you go to South Africa, you know, we got the BEE, people like Julius Malema, that will turn around and say things. The murder rate's incredibly high. What happens there? I believe in the ethos of the human spirit and endeavor saying we need to fight injustice. And therefore, we're going to use a blanket term that says we're against this. But then to turn it and to commercialize it and build a whole economy on the back of it, where we have all this amounts of funding, that I don't agree with, because it doesn't make sense. The other part that I don't agree with is saying because I'm a community of people in a country, like what Malcolm X said, we deserve our own land. No, because everybody had a choice in and around after our, as well as before, and to say, what do we do? As an Indian community, people of Indian origin, we truly are everywhere, Kirk. As you know, we're in the Fiji Islands. Were we liked? Of course not. The only community that has ever been picked up in numbers far greater, most people would imagine, is the people of Indian origin. And it wasn't out of aspirations that we traveled, it was out of utter desperation. No choice. And in those countries that we found ourselves at home in, we weren't particularly liked, yet we molded, we shifted. Where we weren't offered jobs in civil service, we became entrepreneurs. And from that, we started building up economies. We started making social change. We never once stood up and did a march. We never once said, actually, we had to use a system that be to make a difference. Like your country is a classic example, Trinidad and Tobago. Guyana, we've both been to Guyana. We both met probably the same ministers then in that administration. And what their choices were not for economic empowerment for everyday Guyanese. It was based upon a preference of perceived ethnicity that then guided or misguided the policies that impacted over 30,000 people of Indian origin in the sugarcane industry. And I met that Minister of Finance. I think we both know who we speak. He's not the sharpest tool in the world. And to say that he had a look at the economic policies, say, actually, this is no longer a performing asset. I'm going to change my thoughts towards this, off with their heads, or we're going to diversify. Not a chance in hell. Yeah. So that's where my objections are towards it.
I mean, yeah, so there's a few things there. Lots of things that we could talk about, but just to finish up on the Black Lives Matter thing, when it's exported, it's totally different.
Absolutely.
Right? Because when it's exported to the UK, when it's exported to Trinidad or Guyana or where else, it's a different thing. Because in Black Lives Matter, they're talking, it's at least supposed to be about the American descendants of slaves.
Absolutely.
Right? And there's a whole thing about that too, right? And I purposely am using that term, which I think is a very useful and important term. But when you put it out elsewhere, it gets distorted, and I think it's very, very unhelpful, and is used to forward other agendas which are actually nefarious, right? And even within the United States, it has taken a nefarious tone of looting, of reverse racism, right? Of black racism against others as well. So there are all these questions. I agree.
I think I was going to say it's a very because what the question comes down to is what is the very fabric of identity? You know, because we like to look at it and we say, even with the global Indian, although we have the name Indian in there, is actually just saying from a grouping of human beings, ethnicity is there. They have been plucked up and put across the globe. What's it like to be that person? What is the human experience behind it?
Okay, let's discuss this. This is because I had a bit of a discussion with, I don't know if you know who E. Michael Jones is, another very controversial person, but who I really like, about how I hate the idea of brown, this term brown. I hate it, right? Because he was actually talking about the idea of white and how white was a construct. When he was growing up, he was Irish, not white. Right? And there were Lithuanians and Ukrainians and Germans and in the neighborhoods of Chicago. And it's a civil rights movement that made everybody so-called white. But when you were white, you lost your historical identity. Which
absolutely.
Right? Yeah. And this thing, I hate this thing about brown. What is brown? Where is Brownistan? What is the history of brown? What language is brown? You know, what it does, it's a way of removing your real historical identity into some amorphous, meaningless term.
Is a
Has nothing to do with the
lazy
color of your skin.
is a
And
lazy version of
that's right.
politics.
And
Yeah.
it means nothing. And I know that because, in fact, in Trinidad, we actually developed an identity called Indian.
Yeah.
Just like how Black people in America or even Jamaica or whatever did develop an identity called Black. They no longer know if they're Akan or Congo or Hausa, right? They're Black.
Yeah.
We in the West Indies in the, you know, 100 and I can't even remember it's since 1845, so that's, you know, 170.
A long time.
Yeah, right. So we don't know our castes. We don't know the region where we came from. The languages that we spoke aren't spoken as everyday languages anymore, right? So we just see everybody as Indian, even though some people might have been from Tamil roots, some people, a few Punjabis, not much, right? It's mainly Bihar, UP people, and then a minority of people came out of Madras, but they might have been some Andhra, some Telugu and whatever, right? But most Indians in Trinidad have no idea about this stuff. They just know Indian. So when they go to, say, Toronto, Miami, New York, and they see other people who look Indian, they feel this kinship. But then they're not talking to an Indian, they're talking to a Bengali, or they're talking to an Ismaili, or they're talking to a Goan, or they're talking to, and this idea of Indian doesn't really exist, certainly not in the same way it exists here for us as Indian. The Indian communities are so much more enclosed. They're married, you know, so that, let's say as a teenager, right? So they quickly realize they date and marry more within their group than outside of their group.
Are you going to tell me a heartbreaking story here, Kurt?
You know, like, you know, there's a hot Punjabi.
You're not having a Jerry Springer moment here, my man. It's not happening. But no, look, I agree to a degree.
Yeah.
Where we have communities that are deeper rooted, all of a sudden we find the isms. Maybe it's in human nature that we want to separate and we want to figure something out. Although, I'll give you an example. So I went to Malawi. I went in, and we grew up, we're Filipino Indians, so I always laugh about it, even with you. We're the karaoke singing community of the world. And so naturally, our culture is very mixed.
Yeah.
We've got the Punjabi side, we've got the Filipino side. Even the way that I speak at times, I thought those words that were Punjabi, it's only after I got married and my wife was saying, what on earth are you saying? That's not even Hindi or Punjabi, it turned out to be Tagalog words, right? So there's communities. I went to Malawi, sitting there, had my card on me, went to this shop called Pickwick's, took out the card. She goes, I don't accept card payments, it's only cash. A guy behind me, he goes, Baji, don't worry, brother, don't worry. I'll pay for it. Here's my card. You can come to my shop later and pay me back. I never met this guy.
That's right.
And we started speaking after. I said, well, that's really kind of you. Why? He goes, well, we're all one, aren't we? This guy, long beard, Muslim, so on and so forth. Now, for me, I get it because I do the same thing here.
That's right.
But in me, what will we end up doing is saying, hang on, there's a bit of suspicion here. You're not like me. Well, where are you from? Oh, why would you do that? We question the integrity of that individual. And so therefore, we don't look at it as a common denominator in being brown is enough, being Indian is enough. We have to dissect it. I don't think that's a cultural issue. I actually think it's a fact that we've got a lack of understanding of our true identity of being people of Indian origin. Those in Trinidad, those in Guyana, those, for example, in Malawi, Kenya's changed a bit. We get it because we say, look, what India's gone through now is no longer us. Our identity of being Indian isn't based on the tricolor state of India. It's not me looking at this official that's in a prime minister right now who could be voted out in the next 5 years to say that is the pinnacle social custodianship of Indian or identity. No, our version of Indianness is actually what we know now is this community spirit, is having a look, it's celebrating as much Eid as it is for Saki, as it is Diwali. What has changed is the fact there's a pain point. We don't understand that our Indianness isn't based on politics.
Yeah.
That's what the problem is.
There's a few questions here. One is that I'm interested in the fact that it's, especially as you know, coming from a Sikh background as you are, that you chose the term global Indian, right? Because people like to use South Asian because they don't want to say Indian because India, Pakistan, Sri Lanka, Bangladesh, Nepal, Bhutan, and so they don't want to have this hegemony of the Indian state, I suppose, right? But we know that outside of India in our communities, Indian is the term that's used.
Absolutely,
right?
yeah.
And so that's one, the choice of the term Indian as opposed to the, you know, generic outside term.
Well, being politically correct.
And then the question of identity is very important. It's something I've thought about for a very, very long time. And there are a lot of people who will always say, no, but we're human first. And of course we are. Of course we're human, right? And they say, you know, oh, I don't believe in race and or nationality. And I could go to any country in the world and you know, be it, you know, fit in and so forth.
Yeah.
And while that is true to some extent, and I love to travel, and I can go to any country in the world actually, and I've been to so many, and I love interacting with all kinds of people, but I believe that it is, and this is a flaw of liberalism, a huge flaw of liberalism.
Let's just define this first before. Liberalism that we see now is not liberalism. I would say that as a pre-gambit.
Yes.
Yeah.
But I want to even say that the liberalism that we might be in favor of is flawed.
Yeah.
Liberalism fundamentally is an ideology of the individual, right? Where one is not, it's one of individual choice and individual freedom, where one is not bound by a community, by traditions. One can make one's choice freely. One can enter into a contract freely and exit it freely. One is not, you know, bound by the religious traditions of one's ancestors or community. One can move to wherever they want. One can work and live and marry and whatever, whoever they want. That is the essence of liberalism, the perverted form today, or the core form of when it started as John Stuart Mill and so forth, right? It centers around the freedom of the individual. That freedom might be conceived of differently over time and in different places, but that is something at core what it is. And what I am saying is that anthropologically, as an anthropologist as well, it is flawed because the individual can only truly fulfill his or herself within a community. The highest forms of human endeavor, things like trust, honor, courage, these virtues, can only be expressed within a community, because who are you trusted by? Who are you expressing this courage for? This truthfulness, these sorts of things can only be experienced within a community. You only have meaning within your community. You come from a family.
What do you define as community then? Are you defining that as in your local community, proximity community, so people that know you well and well out, to understand the great reliance on the integrity that you have in both thought, action, and speech? That's what you mean?
Yeah. So well. Yeah. Now, this is where it can be more debatable and contestable, but I still hold my ground. But I know there'll be.
I'm not pushing your ground.
Yeah, no. But I'm just thinking in general, right? Which is that, all right. So people could say, for example, and I hear especially liberals who recognize that you need community, because there are, like these kind of hippie commune kind of people, right? And so I choose my family. I can choose who I want to be with. I hate my real family, and this is now my family, right? But it's not really, because then when you get into an argument with these people, you go and you get another family, and then you go and you get somewhere. A real family, you have no choice who your mother, father, aunt, brother, sister, whatever is. You have to deal with them. When you live in a real community that has been, that is stable, not where you don't know your neighbor and someone moves and someone, but you know, you live in a village, a town where your family has been in for generations, right? And they know not only you, they know your uncles and your father and your grandfather. That's a real community, one that persists over time. You have no choice.
So you're equating family relationships with a length of time.
Yes, yes, because community has to endure over time. Community is to call a group of people interacting.
Yeah, no, I get that. If it's superficial to say, I'm walking down, one is walking down the shops as an anthropologist, and I see a community of people, herd behavior. They've only met themselves for 2 minutes, but they must be I get that.
Yeah.
But, okay, I think there's a difference here. And if I were to break it down, I think first part is those who say, I could travel anywhere and the world is my home. How many of them have actually really traveled beyond hotels and resorts?
True.
You know, how many of them have put their lives in their own hands to actually go and see the world as it is, not to the vision that they have?
That's right.
That's the first part of it. I think the second part of it is, like for me personally, my sense of community is, yeah, I could go into Dominican Republic and sit there and I could pass off as Dominican, you know, just by my look. The same thing I studied in Italy. I can pass off as Italian.
Yeah.
But I have to have a certain mindset when I go there to know what I'm capable of doing is not a natural fit for me. I still have to try. I still have to make an element of speaking to people in order to fit in. So therefore, the communal response to me is based upon the response that I give to them.
That's right.
Because intellectually, I'm breaking it down. What you're saying is, okay, Rajan, I can guarantee if I pick you up and put you in somewhere that are people more similar to you, same upbringing, same common denominator, then you have a truer sense of self, because then it's reflected in those around you. But do I derive my meaning from
I'm not exactly saying that, but I'm saying something like that, right? So you could be dropped into a community like that, and you could hate everybody. You could not fit in. You could think they're idiots or whatever. They're small-minded, they're gossipy, whatever, right? And that may all be true, right? And you may hate them and you may want to run away as far as possible. And you'd be well within your rights to do so. But what I'm saying is that no matter what, they're your community still, even if you want nothing to do with it, right? V.S. Naipaul, greatest, I love him, and I'm so fortunate to have actually been his personal friend with him. He was the first to explore these things. I urge every single global Indian, if you have not read Naipaul, he asked these questions first, most controversially, most penetratingly, most globally, period, flat out, right? He went to Africa and the Islamic countries and India and all over the Caribbean and Latin America and the United States. I mean, he was doing this in the 60s, and asking the same questions we are now and coming up with some very sometimes uncomfortable observations
absolutely.
And answers. And he has his stories. Now, I believe his motivation has always been, he's saying, listen, I come from this, here I am, a marginal person in a marginal community in a marginal country. How do I fit in the world? And basically his whole life's work has been that, exploring it through fiction or through travel writing and essays and what. It's always been looking at that, and from his perspective as a Trinidad Indian, Hindu, Brahmin, which is what he was.
Absolutely.
I'm not a Brahmin. And many of his stories are about people who ran away from their identity, and maybe would spend their life in another country or in another place, but in the end, the observation that he always makes is that you never can run away from yourself, right? You have to deal with it somehow. It doesn't mean you have to accept it and love it. You don't have to if you don't really like it, but you have to come to some sort of accommodation with it, because it is inevitably going to be part of you. And it's going to catch up with you. You can never erase your past and who you are. And you know, one of the things you talk about, which is a great point, like people who say they could go over the world, and really have they been? Like, let's say these white liberals, right? And you see, like when they come to the Caribbean or whatever, right? So they think they're so liberal, they think they're so open to black people or whatever, and then when they come here, they're seen as a white person, right? In a way that they never thought, and as a very privileged person, even if they may be poor out in where they are in the UK or in, but they're put into this position of the privileged local whites, and they end up hanging around. You know, you get two things. You get, most of them end up in the kind of white community if they stay here for a long, and they become part of this privileged elite that is a kind of
you know what I think? I
ways.
think it's the pursuit of what Nepal was saying. In one element is you can't escape from yourself.
Yeah.
But then it is taking the time to break down, who am I?
That's right.
What am I?
Right.
What am I? And is one thing that we've always spoken about before is saying, what am I willing to do in order to feel a sense of belonging? And what am I willing to give up in order to feel that perceived sense of belonging?
Yeah.
And I think that's what the elements are. And most people aren't prepared to ask those deeper questions. It's like, for example, not even if it is a religious thing, if you're born into a religion, you don't question, well, why? Is it just because I was born into it? This must be it. This is my determining factor of life. Or likewise, it's, and do you know what? I hate using the word liberal because I don't believe that these people are liberal that turn around and say, because I think what it does, it nullifies what the true essence of liberalism is. Yeah. And these guys are far more, in my mind, conservative than anything else. And they will become, in the future, those that we stand up and say, in our name, you ruin the very fabric of what we stood for. So let's say, for example, the misguided, misinformed, misaligned to who they truly feel they are, that grouping of people. They will go around and say, in a heartbeat, there is no race. And I am one of them. You know, there's ethnicities, there is no race. We know that scientifically. You know, so there is ethnicities, fine, okay. But there's nothing that really divides us. Well, yes, in essence, there is you know, if we go down, but that means you have to have everyone at a blanket-based level of saying, you have no memory, you have no experience, you have no understanding of the world. Yes, on those principles, there's nothing that divides us. But the reality is, we do have experiences, we do have memories, we do have a way in which we have been programmed ourselves to live. Now, under that bias there,
and every
take the conversation on.
That's something I agree with and feel passionately about and have argued about, because you see, when people say that, then this human heritage is essentially Western, right? So then they don't understand that every people on this earth have had important contributions to human civilization.
Absolutely.
And you may not know about it or understand it. And you know what? We have a responsibility. Absolutely. To preserve our ancestors' contribution to the human tapestry, right? So when people say, oh, well, nothing divides us and all knowledge is one and all culture is one and everything. Okay, fine. I mean, I'm open and I love to learn as much as possible all the time. And I have learned and been enhanced and enriched by every other culture on earth, which I'm just inherently fascinated about and love to discuss with, as I do on my podcast all the time. But I come from a tradition as well, and I have something to contribute, and our people have something to contribute together. Whereas most people, when they do it, it's an excuse for the ignorance of their past, the ignorance of their own contribution. And then you develop this, and this gets to the Malcolm X thing, this sort of inferiority complex, because in the end, it's like, well, all the great philosophers are white European people. All the great scientists are these people. All the great military people, all the great, rulers, all the great empires are these, white European people. They actually they might not say it, but you'll think to yourself, well, they might actually be the greatest people ever. And yeah, I
do
guess
you know
so.
what? We did a podcast. We did a lot of stuff with South Africa, right? And it was about apartheid. Remember, that only ended within this generation. And we had these guys on, and one guy, he said he came out of apartheid. He goes, we had this inferiority complex because every time we used to come across a certain community or cower down, we didn't know who we were. And so then all of a sudden, when we got offered a job, we thought, is it because of our skin color?
Yeah.
Is it down to our own ability? And he goes, that actually had a mental scar. He goes, now South Africa to a degree has gone forward, but we still have the BEE, Black Economic Empowerment, that is reverse racism. And the people who are actually getting a huge impact of that are people like the people of Indian origin that are there. You've got obviously the Malaysian community, everybody else, because they also fought for freedom, but they were the forgotten ones of the apartheid. But my point being is that when we have a look at this guise of identity, I think, yes, on one element, we're thinking of the bigger picture. Yeah, we are human beings, of course we are. But to bound us also, and this is the part that I disagree, to say, my heritage, I have to be proud of. For what reason? For what reason am I proud of my heritage? How does it help me? Do I have to define my ability as a human being based on that? Am I that weak of a human being? Say, my background is what now defines my future. Yeah. And one thing I have noticed, especially, and we've both traveled a lot, is that when you start to travel, it changes your mindset. Something shifts. All of a sudden, then you start seeing the world as it is, not through our own culturally enhanced lenses. Yes, don't get me wrong, when I was younger, I used to get fed up. I was born in Birmingham, Handsworth, far from the bourgeoisie in any sense of the word. Yeah. In my school, people pronounced my name correctly. They said Rajan. It was like, ah, great. Yeah. You know, so I think English, as a joke we used to say, was a second language. The first language was Punjabi. That's predominantly Punjabi area. Then I go off to university and people don't call me Rajan, they call me Raj or they call me Roger. I'm thinking it's a very simple name. But because now all of a sudden I'm a minority. Yeah. But then I go to Italy and now it's, are you Indian? Are you English? Are you British? What are you? Oh, you must be tanned. You must be Italian. And so you go through all these little things. Yeah. But you start questioning yourself. But then all of a sudden, then something arises inside. You realize, oh shit, my perceived identity that I told myself I'm Punjabi, I'm this, really means fool in the bigger world. Yeah. Yeah. And what really matters is, who am I becoming now? Not what I want. Who am I becoming along this journey? And can I identify with me much stronger now? Granted, you have to take off your layers of skin to get to that position. Yeah. A lot of people aren't willing to do that. Yeah. A lot of people are willing. I'll
tell you. So I agree to some extent, but I'll tell you where I differ in some way. Because yes, I mean, in the end, I mean, your own self-worth has to come from your own activities. Absolutely. And what if you do come from a community that deserves criticism? I mean, you know, you're not supposed to just be an uncritical cheerleader, right? So I totally accept those things, right? But on the other hand, there is some sort of family loyalty or love that is important, but not everybody has to have it. But I'll tell you, for example, as a West Indian, where the education system has been very deficient and people don't know a lot about their background. Yeah. They have no idea here, Trinidad Indians have no idea where they come from in India, right? Yeah. I've done research. I know that my grandfather's grandfather.
And you've done a lot of extensive research.
Came from a village in Naudumka, which is now in Jharkhand, but at the time was in West Bengal, then later with the border changes within Bihar and then now in Jharkhand. But I know these things because I've done research and it's an obsession of mine. But most people don't have that particular obsession. But now I'll tell you, here's something. When a Trinidad West Indian meets an Indian, what I will call a subcontinental Indian, right? Either in Trinidad or in in the United States or Canada or UK or whatever, many of those Indians, first of all, say, well, we're not really Indian, right? And many Trinidad Indians are upset at that, very upset.
Yeah.
I used to kind of be, and then they say, oh, well, Indians from India are racist and they're clannish and blah, blah. But let me tell you how I kind of understand from the other perspective, because an Indian is not really an Indian. At base, they are Gujarati, they are Bengali, they are Tamil, they are Malayali, they are Punjabi, whatever, right? That's the language they speak. Like, the language is so important. The culture, the music, the food, it's so important. So that when they ask you and you don't know your language, you don't know where you come from. Right?
I get that.
Yes, they don't know. So you don't know where your grandfather comes from. You don't know your language.
Yeah, but
so
that's
you obviously
because,
have no respect for your own history. So
but now, that's because we're looking at it at the vise of our limited understanding of what it is.
Now, on the other hand, when I don't personally get that, because whenever I speak to an Indian abroad, I can say where I come from. I could say my ancestry. I could give the history and say, we were, the history of indentureship and my own, and then my own history of 6 generations in Trinidad and Tobago, and the various things and organizations that my ancestors were actually involved in the development of the country and so forth. And that absolutely changes everything.
This is where it is.
Yeah,
I don't look at you. This is why you asked me a question, why the global Indian?
Yeah.
And you mentioned about being Sikh. Okay, that part is separate. But for me, okay, why the global Indian is because it is that terminology that one would use in Africa, that one would use in the Caribbean, because all of a sudden it avoids all forms of ism. And now, in my mindset, India does not own my identity of me calling myself Indian. Because if I were to allow you to term you're British, or you're not British, or you're Indian, I must be a massive coward in myself. So I said, I own my identity. I'm going to call myself Indian. Fine. It's up to you to now define it not to be the case. And there's a second part of it was saying Indian is different from being an Indian national.
Yeah.
That's the difference behind it. I don't need to have a flag or a passport of India or even a POI card to say I'm now Indian. Now all of a sudden because
India has a much longer history than the nation state of India.
Yeah,
and
absolutely.
And that's why I'm very intrigued and supportive of the move now to call India Bharat in English. That is the term used in India, because the term India itself, now I understand, because before the Indian nation state existed, we were all considered Indian. And in fact, in French, it's Hindu.
Yeah,
right?
Because Hindustan,
Yeah, so that no matter, it doesn't mean that you're religiously Hindu, and then we can get into that whole controversy that Hinduism isn't even really a religion.
Yeah.
It's a name imposed by outsiders on the whole collection of beliefs and philosophies and debates and whatnot that were going on in the subcontinent. So the term Indian predates the nation state and the creation of Pakistan and Bangladesh and Sri Lanka and Nepal and Bhutan.
Absolutely.
And when our ancestors came here, there was no Pakistan.
There wasn't.
So we were all Indian.
We're all one people.
That's right. And I mean, we live here in Trinidad like how our ancestors lived pre-partition in India, right? So the biggest participants in, we call it Husay, which is Muharram, are Hindus. Hindus take part in Muharram big time, right? And even Sunnis take
Absolutely.
part.
Absolutely. Now you get why we use the term. Now you get why we use the term, because all of a sudden it avoids all isms. It's saying actually.
For us it is. So I forgot that you are Filipino, like Filipino Indian. So that totally makes me understand, right? Whereas, you know, a lot of, you know, Indians, in a lot of Indian nationals who would be in the UK, I mean, they would see it like India,
Yeah,
Pakistan.
yeah.
But when they think of India, they think of the nation state of
But
India.
look, to be honest, I did it intentionally for that as well, to say,
Yeah,
okay, are you that in one foot? Are you that thick?
yeah,
Are we there as a community that we have to now say these are the lines that are drawn? And do you expect me to actually abide by that? Hey, look,
yeah.
it may work for you, doesn't work for me.
That's right.
And that was my mindset. So then when we said the global Indian was to say, actually, as nationalities we're many, but as people we're one. So
Yeah,
we've got on our podcast, so we had a lot of issues. People saying, why have you got Pakistani actors on your podcast? You know, why have you got Muslim? I said, well, they're Indians.
yeah,
You know,
yeah, yeah,
I
yeah,
don't define it. Your definition is good for you. I get to redefine what means to me.
yeah,
And do you
yeah,
know
yeah.
what? It comes down to now, not about who can shout the loudest, is who's got the logical argument to explain it the best. I
I
am
mean,
not going to, yeah.
let me add, like, in the Muslim world, where do you have, now they might not like to hear this, but where do you have the female heads of state? It's not in the Arab world, it's not in the Persian world, it's in the Indian world. It's in Bangladesh, it's in Pakistan, and in Indonesia, right?
Yeah.
Megawati Sukarno. That's a Sanskrit name she
Yeah,
has,
yeah,
right?
yeah,
And,
yeah.
and that comes from the Hindu substratum, right? Where, you know, goddess worship, the idea of Shakti and Shankar, right? That female power, that the universe is made of both male power, Shankar and Shakti,
Exactly,
and
yeah,
that it
absolutely.
must be together. The universe is made up of those two forces, and there's an equivalence of the female and the male, a functional equivalence, but not an equality in the sense that it's the same. No, they're not an identity in that it's the
Yeah.
same, right? They are equal in status, but they are different. And that, so a woman, you know, where I say, like, you know, when you look at a Merkel or a Thatcher,
Yeah.
they have become defeminized, right? When you look at a Benazir Bhutto or Indira Gandhi, they are women, right? And this is why I see, like, even like Indian women newscasters. That's like a big global thing. Britain had lots and lots and lots, and like, but after white men, and now white men are now a minority, but in broadcast, like Indian women
Yeah.
are like the #1 broadcasters, and then I mean, it's common in India as well. And when Indian women are in business or in the media or in politics, they're women. They're wearing saris. They're, you know, they're not like, you know, Thatcher or Merkel, they look kind of androgynous. You know, they don't really look feminine, right? They have sort of defeminized themselves to become this kind of neuter gender in a sense. You know?
But that is because of knowing thyself.
Yeah,
Is having an
but
understanding of
I think it's from it's from the Indic philosophies. You know, let me use the word.
I would agree. No, but I would
Yeah.
absolutely agree, Kirk.
Yeah,
It is.
Yeah, that whole underlying philosophy that's there, and it has not, despite centuries of conversion to other religions, the underlying sensibility.
Absolutely. It's there.
Yeah, it's in our DNA. And that is when you talk about global Indian. This is what we understand, because it's way before all of this stuff.
You know what? That's the thing, because are we really going to give? Go back. Identity plays a huge role in people's lives. You know, you would live, you would die. The work that we do, the ideas that we hold, is based upon core values of belief, and identity is part of that, right? So now all of a sudden, I'm going to subject my life that I have on this planet down to somebody else's version of dividing up a nation on a map. And I'm going to say, based upon those lines, I'm going to shift my identity. No, we're not weak. We're human beings. And I don't know about you or you or you, but for me, that doesn't work.
Yeah.
For me, that's why it's such a powerful thing, because Indianism does not belong just to modern day India in terms of the political structure. Indianism is shared by everybody, whether you are 6 generations deep, 7 generations deep, and it goes beyond the ideas of caste, of religion, of isms. It comes down to the very fabric of people from those areas.
Yeah.
We like to think it is pure ambition that made us travel out there. It isn't, it's desperation.
Yeah, yeah.
And so then when people, and the biggest objection I had was I did a lot of stuff in India as well. I lived in India for quite a while. And I used to meet with people and they said, well, you're not one of us. I said, great, I don't want to be one of you. I'm better.
Yeah.
You know, because that's the first thing back. I said, I don't need you to accept me for me to feel a sense of identity. That may work with other people, but what that shows is that you have a lack of understanding who you are, not me.
Yeah,
you know, and because of that mindset that's been fixed, maybe it's just pure stubbornness, or maybe it's the fact that I come to an age or side of me that thought, man, you know, this is a beautiful thing that we have, which is called life. And so therefore, I get to choose and determine what I feel comfortable in. It's like if I'm in Italy, my Italian's probably better than my Punjabi, right? And so when I'm over there, people say, you're Italian. I said, I'm not. You know, no. Now, forget about your net. You're one of us. I thought, how interesting. We're both anthropologists, right? How interesting. Okay, what happened for you to accept me into a way that I couldn't accept myself? What was that moment in time? You know, and and one thing I have to say that I love about the Caribbean, but also it was mind-boggling, being in Guyana. People I'm Indian. Hey, great, good for you, man. I'm African. Hey, great, good for you. So tell me, what does Indianness mean to you? What does Africanism mean to you? Okay, so now you're fighting over your formed a perceived identity, and when you haven't even did yourself a favor by deep diving into it and say, how does that form my opinion? That to me isn't national identity. That is downright laziness.
Yeah.
And so therefore you deserve to be slapped by 1.4 billion people of India and the 1 billion people of Africa to say, how dare you ruin this that we've been working for because you just find it as a nice little band-aid and your comforted feelings. Because you want to feel that to me is wrong. I think if we are going to claim to be part of identity, at least take ourselves a notion of deep diving and saying, what does it mean to me?
And this is where I will be, I find common ground with the universalists. We all have multiple identities. Nobody is fixed by a single identity.
Of course
right? I'm an English speaker, so I'm part of the English speaking world. So when I go to France, when I go, right, so I will find myself communing with another English speaking person, you know, or I'm an Indian, I'm a West Indian, I'm a Trinidadian, right? So depending on the context, right, you know, I'm a university graduate, I'm a graduate of the University of Toronto, I'm a graduate
so we have
the University of Hull.
Yes,
and they're overlapping. They're sometimes separate. They are, and so we have all these identities. They're not all equally impactful, but they all exist, and it's at different levels, at different times. They have different levels of significance and meanings, and they all impact on each other, so that and you know. I was born in America, so therefore my identification with Trinidad is always going to be complicated by that. Always.
Did you know you touched on something there? There's one thing that has been a massive bane for me. I was in the US. I only find it in the US. I don't actually find it anywhere else. I met one person who said that they were 1/16th Indian. As in not Native American, but Indian from India. I was like, great. Now you found out. How does it make you feel being 1/16th? How does it impact your life? Because I'm scratching my head thinking, identity matter. Of course it does, but God, and it's really weird. Some people will kind of plunge into it and they think identity is.
Do you know why? Do you know why in America that's a thing? Say you're 1/16th.
Why?
Because the laws in Haiti, right? In Haiti, how far did they go? I think they went up to 128, you know. If it was a pure black and a pure white, it was classified as a mulatto. A mulatto and a white makes a quadroon. A and they had names for
Yeah.
128 racial permutations, and each of those permutations had legal
Significance.
implications.
Yeah,
Right?
like South.
Just,
Yeah.
yeah. So exactly like South Africa, and South Africa got it from America, right?
Yeah.
Because in America, if you're 132nd Navajo, you can claim to be on the Navajo reservation and to get the benefits of a Navajo. But if you're 164th, sorry, right?
Yeah.
You know, so the racial accounting was part of the new world system of ethnicity. So people, you know,
But people have held, but it's different now
lingered,
because
yeah.
people have held on to it as a
Yeah,
form of,
it
this is my new
lingered as part
Gucci
of the
bag.
vocabulary. They don't know why, they don't know
Yeah.
the history, but it's just part of
But
the
it,
way.
it just shows, that's the thing, the
Yeah.
human nature. I think it is. Hey, here's my Gucci bag. It's in fashion. I'm also 1/16th. I'm also fashionable. Hey, I care as well. Look, do you know what?
Yeah.
I also get my, I understand. The problem is, I think, even now we're
Yeah.
touching on the liberalism part, is that people don't think through situations. They don't think in depth about ideas. They don't think in depth about identity and what that means. What we're doing is that we've got this autopilot part of us that thinks we just want to get through life. And so therefore, everyone's turning things into a fad. That to me is incredibly and remarkably dangerous. Like you speak about politics as well. The very fabric of the political machinery is turning into that. We talk about the populist theory. We've always had populism. Come on, that is the very fabric of the DNA of politics.
Yeah,
You know,
exactly.
is the only X factor competition that you can win. That's not just about your qualifications.
And what is the horror about if you believe in democracy,
Yeah.
then shouldn't you be popular?
Absolutely. No, but we've taken words.
Yeah.
We for ourselves, we devoid it of the emotional impact. And by doing that, we actually get rid of what it really means and signifies. And then we slap on this thing to say, no, oh, well, I'm far greater than you. Can't you see I'm an intellectual? I can use these words in a much more precise manner. And you think, wow. And what happens? You get people that keep, and that's why there's a lot of stuff that you talk about on your platform that I absolutely agree with. Don't get me wrong, there's times that I'm sure we'll clash heads, which in itself is good, right? That's the nature of being a human being. But there's these elements that, yeah, it does frustrate me, it burns up my blood because I think, don't you dare turn, like the use of liberalism. No, liberalism now is not liberalism. They should
And
not
also
be called liberals.
For me, up in those countries in Europe, in Canada, and America. By the way, all Canadians listening, when you guys say North America, you're so racist against Mexico. But the term nationalism. Yeah. So just like I say liberalism. So when they talk about nationalism as, you know, as being pejorative, that's why I'm doing this thing on third world nationalism. That was part of our freedom. That was nationalism is the only force in the world that has ever defeated imperialism. Nothing else. Not liberalism, not socialism, not communism.
Absolutely. Nationalism. Absolutely.
And in every country you go to in Africa, Asia, Latin America, the Caribbean, all the parties have national in their name for a reason.
Absolutely.
Right?
And why did we have the law of self-determination?
That's right. And you know, being proud of your country, being you know, looking out for the best interests of your country is not evil, is not wrong, you know, and this demonization of that. And you know what, from a period at a time, you know, when I was into Malcolm X and I hated white people, at one point I did. It was so sad, even what I did to some of my really good friends, how I disowned them, and I feel so bad to this day about it, you know. But I coming from that extreme and now sort of being, I think a lot of it is being away from the context. I'm now able to see it, and I have a lot of understanding for white nationalists, for people who feel, listen, my town has changed completely from, you know, from the time my grandparents knew and my ancestors knew, and I never asked for this. And it's politicians out there who are doing this because they want cheap labor. not because they love brown people, the term I hate,
Yeah.
right? It's not because they love them. It's an economic thing, and they're destroying the little place of the
You're
world I
absolutely
loved and
right. You're
owned.
absolutely right.
And you guys live in gated communities, and you guys go to the whitest schools. You guys live in the richest, whitest areas, but you're telling us we're deplorable because we love our
I
little
think
town
it's
how it
it's this
was.
thing. I agree, because we're saying so we had a big topic of discussion in the UK, and it was having a look at saying, well, okay, when you come in talking about immigration, how much of the onus is on you to also adapt into the environment in which you belong? And one of my peeves has been saying, okay, you come in, say, for example, whichever country, let's say, argument's sake, India, and the first thing you want to do is set up a mandir or a gurdwara masjid,
Yeah.
but you've already got one that's within a 5-mile radius and is easy accessible. What you're really doing then isn't fair, because you're trying to impose on others. Be sensible to the locations that you're in. If these are the countries that you call, and it was out of choice that you moved to those locations,
That's right?
right?
Exactly.
If you don't, and it's funny, me and Kovinder, so we were talking, and for the media world, I said, okay, what do we do, Kuli? We've got this idea that we want to do, and I approached the BBC, and I want to do this documentary called The Lies of the Commonwealth.
Interesting.
And saying, okay, well, you've got people that are common, and you've got people who are wealthy, and they're two separate people, but we call them the Commonwealth. No, let's talk about it. So as you can imagine, we go up to the BBC. I got this great idea. Hey, look, I've traveled to these countries. I've met with the heads of state. I'm young as well, blah, blah, blah. No, we're giving it to somebody else. Really? Why? What is it based on?
Project?
Huh?
The same project?
The same project, yeah. Although I came up the Commonwealth,
Yeah.
right? So I thought, okay, interesting. And so I said, I got two choices. Do I say, oh, it's because I'm brown, I'll go down that route? Or do I say, okay, well, I live in Britain. It's a wonderful country. And do you know the beauty of Britain is? If I don't agree with you, I can set up my own company and I can compete, because that is Britain that I understand. Right. So I don't have to then compete over my perceived ethnicity. I can now compete and say, if I don't agree with you, I will set up my own platform. Mm-hmm. That's what we did. Yeah. And that's what I went out and did. And that's why I have a massive bane in my existence when people here in the UK are saying, well, no, it's not fair. You're not showcasing my company. No. Yeah. That is because you're butt-ass lazy and you haven't realized the privilege.
Let me give you a story that kind of parallels to it, but it touches on the same question. Why, because I asked, why do they have to showcase your community? Because you know what? A lot of these people from the countries they come from are not tolerant to their neighbors or whatever, right? Yeah. So like in Trinidad, they don't like it when Venezuelans come here or
absolutely
tensions and take over, right? So in your own country, there's a lot of xenophobia, but then when you go abroad, you expect
you're holier than thou
to embrace you, right? But I'll tell you a story. My book, Politics in a Half-Made Society here. I dropped my globe. But when it was launched, I had the honor of being invited to launch it in the UK House of Commons. I was in fact the only West Indian to ever launch a book inside there and so forth. So it was a great honor. I went up there, and now a lot of my friends in university circles up there, so they're lefties, right? What else is new? And they would, they would kind of concede that, it was an honor, but then they say, but don't you think it's like too British kind of, or what? And I said, but that's exactly what I love, right? I wish in Trinidad we had things that were more Trinidadian, right? And I want to see things that are more British in Britain, right? Yeah. And they just couldn't take that because they want to destroy British heritage. They do, right? Especially the more extreme, consciously anti-racist, socialistic, communistic, anarchistic ones. Right? But then these people, right? They don't want to go back to their own countries, right? So if you say to go back to Trinidad or to India or wherever, no. So you have no loyalty. You
No,
are
but I get,
no
so there's a
loyalty.
debate there because it's
Yeah.
saying on one side, if I come over as an immigrant, I expect to have the freedom and the fairness in terms of equality, not equality of outcome, but equal opportunities to go for something, right?
Yeah.
So that I understand. And there's a prefix of there has to be fairness in terms of my right to showcase who I am. That I agree with. And what we both also agree with is saying, but also you have to be fair, that you can't then disturb or challenge or change what existing is there just to suit your own needs. Not because of a lack of opportunity, but because you're trying to change the favors into your hands. And that's what's happening in the UK. So you put an example. Here you obviously know that we had statues that are torn down. Colston statue was torn down. And so I had a discussion with a couple of people. They said, Rajan, what do you think about it? And I said, I don't think it's British. I don't think it's human to do that.
Yeah.
Because for me, what modern day Britain is not erasing the past. It's saying, okay, it never existed. No, it's saying, keep the statue and put a placard next to it and talk about the other part of the narrative.
Yeah, exactly.
Therefore, give people the benefit of the intellectual curiosity that we all have to say, here's the other side of the story, and now it's up to you to choose. But to do that, we're no better than everybody. And then we have to look at...
Let me put two things to add to the story that will go to. One was that coming back from the talk, and I was very pleased and everything. I was on this underground and on the tube with Michael Portillo.
Yeah.
And I saw Michael Portillo there. I liked him a lot. This is like in the early 2000s. So he was still kind of a big thing on TV and all that kind of stuff. And I really liked this.
No, not saying that you're showing your age, Kirk, but
yeah. So I struck up a conversation with him. We had a great, a nice, talk. I told him, I just launched my book in the House of Commons. So we're talking. I told him, yes, I'm from Trinidad, and blah. So he was talking. Bye when he left. And there was something, because I also lived my life as an immigrant. There's something totally different about that conversation, because I was coming from my country as a guest in their country, speaking about the history of my country to them. So it was a meeting of equals. Yes. I wasn't coming to try to take your job, to try to, or whatever, you know what I mean? So none of that could be, and if anyone ever told me to go home, I'd say, I'm going very soon. So, right? So you can't throw any of those insults, nothing, because I don't want anything from you. I'm not asking anything from you, right? And so there was this type of interaction there that could only be possible because I was rooted here, as opposed to, I know how it is being an immigrant up there, and then it's a different sort of stance. Now, so that's one thing and then the other thing I wanted to add is that, especially in Britain, what complicates the whole thing, and if any sort of my lefty friends or our listeners they might be angry that I'm not putting this in, so I'll put it in because it's important. Britain was the center of empire, right? So a lot of that people feel this is a revenge, going back because Britain stole from everybody, and now we're going back and we're taking, right? So I understand that there's a complication that, yes, I mean, yes, Britain was an empire and did go into all our countries and destroyed and killed and looted and upended and everything in our country. Absolutely right. And I'm glad we kicked them out, right? So, but now to base yourself on revenge, on taking revenge
absolutely.
in Britain, why don't you make your country better then? If that is your true aim.
It's because, you know what, Kirk, is lazy.
Yes,
it's easy to blame people for not achieving things yourself.
That's right.
I get it all the time. People say, oh, Britain. Okay, great. So now you figured that out. What are you gonna do next?
That's right.
Okay. For me, Britain is one of the greatest countries out there because, do you know what? It awards me the ability of freedom of thought, of action. Now, do you know what? Britain may be something else for other people out there. What it did in the past, of course, I'm sure. But that wasn't every single British. At the same
That's
time
right.
that we had the things like the wars, we had the suffragette movements, we had
And, let,
women
and
that fight
let,
for it.
let me
So
tell
we
you,
forget that. We forget that a lot of people in Britain were against the empire.
When I got my I was Wilberforce Scholar at the University of Hull in East Yorkshire. Right? I had never been to England before. I'd never been to Britain before. Right? But growing up in Canada, living in Trinidad, and you know, you're part of the empire, and you know, so you know well, or you think you know everything about England, right? Watch all the British comedy shows. You know all the stuff, right? All the music. I was into British music and all that kind of stuff. But you know, but I'd never been there.
Yeah.
And I knew about British socialism and all the stuff you're talking about, which I was also very much inspired by, the suffragettes and the levelers and the diggers and you know, the Herrick Hobsbawms and then so many of our radicals were radicalized there in Britain, and like CLR James and part of the whole move. Right, great. So I got this. So I'd never gone there, but I also kind of had a sense that, you know, Britain is it's a dying empire. And it's kind of a decrepit, dying society. And why do I really want to go there? I really have no desire. Everything looks like it's just dying, right? So I got this scholarship, and it was to Hull in Yorkshire. I didn't know where that place was. Nothing. I said, at least it could have been in London. But here, you know, oh my God! I wish I wish it were in London. Okay, I have to go to Hull in East Yorkshire. That's like. Well, you don't know the places I'm talking about here, but let's say, I mean, I said in Trinidad, that's like coming to Trinidad and being sent to Rio Claro, right? Somewhere isolated out in the bush that hardly anybody in Trinidad even knows, right? Because I know when I went to England and in Hull later, hardly anybody in England goes to Hull because it's off the line. So you have to want to go to Hull to go to Hull.
Absolutely.
But when I was there, those 3 years were amazing. I got to understand England. I really did. If I were in London, I would have been gobbled up in that whole immigrant experience and all the international thing and blah blah blah, and I would have known cosmopolitan, international, multicultural London, but not really England.
It shows his experiences
when I was in Yorkshire, I knew England, you know, and I loved it. I loved it. I actually stayed to save money as a student and as an Indian. I stayed in a council housing, right? Because I had this whole house to myself, and everybody was terrified to go there because, you know, if you know about Hull, it's like lots of crime. But I'm from the West Indies. I lived in Jamaica. I don't care. I've seen worse, right? And in fact, but the people were great. There was this real big tough guy there, right? There's this real tough guy who used to stand in the corner every day and just look, right? And he and I became such good friends, you know. I loved, there was a quadrant. That's what the place is called in Hull. I just had such an amazing, eye-opening, insightful time being there. And yeah, I could go to London anytime I want, and I did, and I have family out there, and Hounslow, and it's like I'm in Pakistan or something, right? Or Punjab or somewhere, right? I mean, it's like, my God. And so I got to experience London quite a bit, and whenever I had to do research at the British Library or whatever. So I just wanted to add that to your
you just wanted to talk about Hull and just make sure that you had something about Britishness, so your leftist friends felt good.
And I actually, you know, learned to love it, you know.
Do you know what? That's the thing.
And admire it, because you were talking about how yes, there's a colonial history that, yes, we can all criticize rightly, but there are great things. And I came to really respect England. I said, okay, yes, objectively it is declining, you know, but it's an amazing society.
You know what? It really is. Britain is beautiful.
It's an amazing place with an amazing history, with amazing people, and you know, and it to erase that, to criticize that, to not even know it, right? So a lot of people in London would piss on Yorkshire, right? I mean, what the hell, you know? You're an immigrant, you know, you ran away from your country to come here, right? And you're pissing on what, and that makes
You know what? I think what it is, it shows the nature of human behavior. That's all it is.
It does.
It's
You're
the
right.
fact that
We're all human.
it wasn't the colonialism wasn't Britain. It was people that lived in Britain. It wasn't Britain. Britain is just is the people that lived there at that, and it wasn't everybody. It was that East India Tea Company guys that went over.
That's right.
That did that, right? There's a fantastic book. Lalwani did it, and he says at the end of it, he goes, "Imagine what we would have been like if Britain decided to stay at home." And so he goes, it wasn't all bad. We also have to, and there's another argument to that, saying it's very easy now that the world has kind of picked up on this. I'm not going to say nationalism, because again, I think people have been taking the words out of context. I'm not going to say it's liberalism either, because it's not right, but they're saying we're going to blame Britain for everything. And so all our woes, we could have been far better than we are right now. But it was Britain that came in and did these things. Yeah, there's only so long that you can utilize our argument for, because you have the economic policies in place for over 50 years after that. Singapore, within the shortest space of time, were able to galvanize themselves to become where they are. So that's the thing. But I get it, because everybody wants a shortcut.
How did you let Britain come in the first place then?
Yeah.
So, you know what I mean?
I have to say, do you know what, Kirk, for our first collaboration together, I think this went really, really well.
Yeah. I know we should be wrapping up, and I'm sure there's going to be a lot more.
Absolutely. I think there will be a lot more that we can do, because there's so many things there's so many other questions I want to fire at you that I think is fascinating. I think the piece that you wrote that's on the Global Indian about the curry goat, there's a lot of themes that are in there that I thought, that's really interesting. And I think a lot of people don't realize just the sheer amount of community that are in Jamaica.
Yeah, that's right.
And that is it. And I think
and how influenced it, because you know what distinguishes, like when a Black Jamaican goes to the States, right? And there's a risk of being absorbed into the Black identity.
Yeah.
One of the thing that Black Jamaicans use to distinguish themselves is their love of curry goat.
Right?
That is how Indian culture has subtle, and then the whole link with Rastafarianism.
Yes.
Rastas are just Indian sadhus, and that is not a coincidence. It's because where Rastafarianism emerged in West Kingston was an Indian settlement.
Absolutely. And when you look at the very basis of it, vegetarianism,
Ganja is a Hindi word.
Yeah.
The chillum they use. They're using the word. The founder of Rastafarianism changed his name to Gunguru Maharaj. But yeah, so
we'll save that for the next discussion, because it's true. I think there's a lot of things, and I'm looking forward to developing the platforms on the both sides that you have, the storyboard as well as your thought leadership side, because I think there's a lot of overall themes. And what's really interesting is we've both got different perspectives from different know-how. You are the intellectual. You have been out there, studied it, written the books. I am just the guy that just turns up, travels into a country, and somehow navigates his way through. I can see a TV show coming from that in itself, you know?
Absolutely. Yeah. And I mean, and for me, this has always been my media broadcast. This has always been just a form of action, because I am politically involved, and I have been and continue to be. And I stand for causes. I've been arrested. I've been banned and all sorts of stuff. And yes, I mean, I can do dispassionate intellectual analyses, but I believe in things. I stand for things, and I make sacrifices when necessary. And I think there's work that you guys do in terms of effecting change in the world, and that's something I think that we can also
absolutely. I think good. Well, on that side, Kirk, what I am going to do, I'm going to wrap it up. Otherwise,